Thank you so much for being with us here in the Voice of Job Seekers. This is Mark. And if you want to know more about the podcast, you can go to thevoiceofjobseekers.com. You can even leave a message there. Just print the send voicemail button on the right side. You can leave a message right there on the site through your computer or laptop. Anyhow, this week is kind of special. I have with me today Kristen Pressner. She is the Human Resources Global Head at Roche Industries, or should I say Roche Diagnostics, and I want to make sure I get that right. She is the originator of a TED Talk that's become quite popular, and I thought that you might enjoy talking with her as well. It's called Flip It to Test It, and I just want to get Kristen in here. How are you?
Hi, Mark. It's great to be here.
Now, we met on Twitter some months ago, and I think we both are kind of using the hashtag unconscious bias, and I think we found each other.
And, that's exactly right.
And we had this 2 or 3 hour dialogue. Now, I should say that she's in Switzerland. So we had this direct message on Twitter for about 2 or 3 or 4 hours or something like that. And we had a great discussion. And since then, this is before she was even on my radar. Since then, I've looked at her TED Talk. And her TED Talk, well, I'm going to let her tell a little bit about her TED Talk and a little bit about the background, how her thought in this movement has originated.
Super. Thanks, Mark. And it really was. It's so cool that you can meet someone on Twitter, huh?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
From halfway around the world.
People you like.
Yeah, exactly. So the TEDx talk came out about 9 or 10 months ago, and the official title is, Are You Biased? I Am. And my hope through that talk was to provide a different perspective in the concept or the thought of unconscious bias. In my experience, I think a lot of people aren't even aware that there's a such thing as unconscious bias. But even among those who are aware, like people who are in professions like ours, I think there's a lot of people who kind of intellectually get it, but they don't really understand how pernicious unconscious bias can be and the impact that it can have in really not enabling us to bring out the best in people. And fundamentally, that's something that I'm super passionate about is, what am I doing to make sure that everything that everyone is capable of is unleashed on this world? And I would be beside myself to imagine that I would be contributing to holding that back. And I would say there's, of course, some bad people in the world, but by and large, people are good, and they wouldn't want to be contributing to that. As I share in the talk, I caught myself behaving in a way that indicated I have bias against women leaders. And it was especially shocking because the bias that I recognized that I had was that I saw men as providers and not women. And so it's even more unlikely that that would be me, since for the last 17 or so years, I've been the sole provider and my husband's been a stay-at-home father to our 4 children. So you would think that somebody who for 17 years has lived inside the model of woman as provider, man as child caregiver, that it would be possible for me to overcome that bias. But it really hit me how strongly embedded unconscious bias can be when that isn't enough, because there were so many different things coming at us that say the opposite. And so what I wanted to do in this talk was to, in a perhaps disarming kind of a way, non-accusatory kind of a way, help people understand just fundamentally what unconscious bias is, that if it could happen to me, it could happen to you. And if that's not how you want to show up, then I wanted to give an idea of how each of us can, in a very pragmatic and fast and free, instant way, test ourselves for bias and switch to conscious decision making.
Yeah. Could you tell a little bit about, was that an idea that you were spreading before the TED Talk? Or was that a realization from the time that you were asked to do the TED Talk?
Yeah, so this is where it's really interesting. I had never used the term flip it to test it, which is, of course, the idea that I share. I'd never used those words or thought about it. But in looking back after I did the talk and after sharing that as the idea in my talk, I realized that probably the idea first was a seed and then started to germinate after I saw a Pantene, the shampoo company, a Pantene ad called Labels Against Women. And in the ad, it shows a man dressed in a suit, and he's probably dictating a memo. And you see behind him on the building the Hugo Boss logo. So it says boss, and that's what we see. He looks like a boss.
Right.
And then the next frame is a woman dressed very professionally in a similar office doing something similar, but the logo turns to bossy. And then it pans to the next scene, and you see a professional man giving a very emphatic speech at a podium, and in front of the podium it says persuasive. And then it pans to a woman, very professional, doing the same thing and emphatically giving a speech, and the thing on the podium says pushy. And then it pans to a man working late at night with a baby's crib nearby, and his label is dedicated. But then it pans to a woman doing the same thing, and her label is selfish. And so this ad really struck me because it hit me that there are different ways that we label, in essence, the same behavior, depending on the gender of the person that we're dealing with. Right. And so a long time ago, I did a keynote address at a Women in Leadership conference in the Middle East, and I had shared this ad because it was impactful to me, and as it turned out, it was quite impactful to the people there. And it started me a bit on a journey where I started doing the concept of flipping it to testing things, saying, how would I feel about this scenario if I, was dealing with someone of the opposite gender or a different ethnicity or a different age group or someone who was thin versus overweight, really any area that you can have bias, and you can mentally flip who you're dealing with for somebody else and check and see if it might cause you to react or behave in a different way.
Well, I think if we were to apply that to the commercial, it's inferred that you wouldn't call a man bossy or pushy.
No, it's generally not a word used to describe men.
No, not typically. But for women, it was a way to curtail or help them pull back their behavior if they're being outspoken or trying to make a strong point. And traditionally, all over the world, it's not just the U.S., and interesting enough, you were giving that speech in the Middle East, where a lot of that is so obvious and so covert. But I think one of the things that I think is true to have the dialogue, and it's timely to have the dialogue. So would those labels apply the same way to a man than it would be to a woman? That's what flip it to test it is. Is that the right idea?
That's exactly it. And this is a bit what I share in my talk, is that, there's research that shows that we collectively as human beings have certain expectations of men, generally that they're, assertive, and strong and driven. And then we have certain expectations of women, and that's that they're helpful and sensitive and supportive. And if you boil that down to even simpler terms, we see men as taking charge and women as taking care. And if you realize that, it kind of becomes the root cause analysis, the root cause of kind of all of the challenges that I see women in the workplace, and often also other underrepresented minorities facing. If we believe that men take charge and women don't, then certain things that you see as challenges in the news for women, like, maybe you've seen that women give more credit for their success to external factors like luck or help from others, when men tend to attribute theirs to their own innate skills and qualities. Right. Or women tend to get interrupted more and get less credit for their ideas or successful outcomes. Or women lack confidence or feel like imposters. I mean, if you look at all these challenges out there, the root cause is that the vast majority of us, deep down in the back of our brains, see men as taking charge and women not. And then if you take it to the next step, if we see women as taking care, then it isn't surprising that women are expected to behave in ways that are more helpful and supportive. So when a woman maybe behaves in an assertive or direct style or pushes her ideas, she's labeled as aggressive or ambitious, but a man doing the same behavior might be seen as confident and strong. Right. Those are the different examples that I give, where you can see, if you flip it, if you say, wow, I'm experiencing this woman as aggressive or out for herself, and these are trigger words for me as an HR professional. If I hear those words, I'll often say to my leaders, okay, and if we flip it to test it, if it was a man, would you feel the same way? Mm-hmm. And by doing that, you return the person from kind of an unconscious feeling of she should be more helpful and supportive, and that's not how I'm receiving her, to a place of recognizing that that's what leadership looks like, and it just feels a little uncomfortable unconsciously, and then you can make a conscious decision.
Yeah, I think when I hear, I can kind of hear the male ego in the background, maybe partially because I'm a male. But I think in the background, some men are going to interpret this, or have interpreted this type of dialogue, as you're just trying to diminish the male, the role of men, so that women can rise up, and that totally is not the indication at all. We're just saying fairly look at how women are looked at and how men are viewed, and it's not the same. When a woman is more assertive, she's considered more aggressive, then she's out of her place. It's ultimately what we think, but we've learned to interpolate it slightly different, so we're not seen that way, but that's what it is. As a man, understanding that part of our orientation through our mothers and fathers has been, the man's role is this, the woman's role is this, and those are traditional. Tradition doesn't always mean right. That just means that's the way that somebody's brought up, that they're willing just to pass on because it is tradition.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting to me, kind of one of the first reactions that I get when I talk about the desire to see, at least in my case, I talk a lot about how I'd like top leadership to be represented, whether that's top leadership in corporations or top leadership in volunteer organizations, non-for-profits, governments. Mm-hmm. But I believe that top leadership, those are the people who have power and can make things happen.
Yeah.
And I believe that then that should represent the people they support and represent. And so if the vast majority of our top leadership is white males, then that isn't probably the best we can do for the people they support. But what's interesting, to your point, is I'm often really surprised by how frequently, not just men, but both men and women kind of jump to the conclusion, yeah, but you wouldn't want the pendulum to swing too far in the other direction. And it always kind of cracks me up because, I think we're a long way off from a concern that the pendulum's going to swing in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Like literally, it's not going to happen in my lifetime or my children's lifetime that we'll see gender equality according to the World Economic Forum.
Right.
And so I really think that we should cross that bridge when we come to it, because it's really pretty far off.
Yeah, it's going to happen relationship by relationship and instance by instance. There's not going to be this large surge all of a sudden. And I think that's what people tend to fear, and it's all throughout our culture, especially here in America, and not to mention, the areas of the world where you are in Europe, that this movement's going to take over tomorrow, and that white men would become slaves. In that sense, that's not going to happen. But I think if we just took a view. If everybody took a view of, the balance that needs to be applied here, I think we would move a little bit further forward, and it'd be a lot better for everyone. This is for everyone's benefit. It's not just for the woman's benefit. It's not just for the man's oppression, if you will. Yeah. It's about having a fair and amicable dialogue. Where everybody benefits.
Yeah, and I have to laugh a little bit because it is an interesting flip it to test it. Oftentimes, when companies have diversity goals, they may be stated something like, we want to have at least 20 or 25% women in our top leadership, or things like that. And this is where I feel like that kind of is a no-win for everyone. It doesn't feel great, and I think you're hitting on the fact that doesn't feel great for women. It doesn't put, women feel like, gosh, when you have a goal like that makes me feel like I got the job because I'm a woman. I don't want a job because I'm a woman. And when you have a goal like that, it makes men feel bad, like, whoa, are you going to take a less qualified candidate? And I'd love to come back to that verbiage, and in order to meet your goal or your quota. And what's interesting to me is I think there's an opportunity to do a flip it to test it, even in the way we articulate these goals, because if you flip it and say, well, our goal is to not have more than 75% of one gender in our top leadership, when you state it like that, it's kind of outrageous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
it
it's the
is.
same goal.
Well, it's sort of like when you're choosing teams and you're going to say, we're going to outnumber the women 3-1. And we're going, well, who's going to celebrate that?
Yeah, yeah. Yet, when we set goals to get to 25%, that's exactly what we
Yeah, I mean,
say,
that's
which is
pretty much
fascinating.
what we're saying is that we'll still outnumber you for 3-1, and that should be better.
Yeah.
No, not really. So, uh, in all the stories that I'm sure people coming to tell you, and there might be even companies asking you questions all of the time. What are some of the small victories that you've heard? Maybe have you heard people coming to realization and having watershed moments of clarity since that time, since the speech?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that. Doing a TEDx talk is a little bit of like an out of body experience because it's really a lot of work. And, for those who haven't seen the talk, it's only 8 minutes long. And I've had a lot of colleagues who know me well say, you said it was so much work, but it's just 8 minutes of you being you. I don't get it. What was all the work? But,
Mm-hmm.
there's that famous quote. I think it's attributed to Mark Twain. I would have written you a short letter, but I didn't have time.
Right.
It's a lot. It takes a lot more time to get to a clear, crisp, concise articulation of things.
Yes.
And there was a point where I really felt like, gosh, I'm not sure if this is going to be worth all the work. I have a very robust life outside work. I have a big job.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure this is going to be worth it. And so what's been the coolest part of the journey since the talks come out, a number of months ago it is the number of people who've reached out to me. And a number of them are inside my organization, but just as many outside my organization who said, this has really got me thinking. It's non-accusatory. It didn't tell me I'm a bad person because I'm biased. It just gave me a free, instant alternative to being biased. And I use it all the time, and I see the broad application. And so, there's been a Forbes blog and, an article in Inc. magazine and a number of podcasts. And Adam Grant has on a number of occasions shared the talk, the message of the talk, and the idea of flip it to test it as different things come to light, like the fact that, recently it was in the news that male and female entrepreneurs are getting asked wholly different questions by venture
Mm-hmm.
capital firms.
Yes.
The male being on kind of, what's your shot at winning, basically, and the women kind of getting it, how are you going to mitigate loss? And so it really drives very different outcomes for men and women. And these are all flip it to test it opportunities. And so I've just been really thrilled that kind of the hashtag flip it to test it and the idea has spread in the way that it is. I was at London Business School recently sharing with a consortium of top companies there, and we were working to marry up the current thinking in companies around diversity and the current work coming out of academia.
Mm-hmm.
And these are just, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Probably once a day I get an email from someone. So the moral of the story is it was totally worth it because I'm really convinced it's been years and years and years of us not really seeing movement on this topic. Many years, generations. And, I look back to earlier in our discussion here where you said, people need not to be worried that things are going to flip the other way overnight. And I think, that's clear. Things are not swinging in the opposite direction overnight. Women on boards decreased in 2016. And so it just gives you a sense that it's hard to move the needle on these things. But I have this feeling, I just have a gut feeling that we're really close to a tipping point. Because if enough people really invest the 8 minutes or however long they need to really understand what is unconscious bias and how might that play out and what can I do to combat it, we will hit a tipping point where everything becomes a lot easier. And one of the things I like about the idea is it doesn't accuse you of anything. If you were doing something that I thought was biased or I was, and you say, Kristen, you think you might be biased, even that conversation, it's awkward and it's uncomfortable and I feel bad. But if now we have a common language and flip it to test it, and I'm finding this playing out at work for me all around the globe, I find people saying, wait, is this an opportunity for us to flip it to test it?
Right.
It just feels so much less accusatory, and it puts people in a mode of, wanting to discover and of curiosity versus judgment.
Right. And not that it would change the Well, I think it does change the dialogue or how the dialogue is presented. And I think you've heard my speech when I gave earlier this year at the University of North Georgia.
Yeah.
My first statement was that I am a recovering chauvinist. Uh, I was downgraded in a good way from being a chauvinist pig to just a chauvinist. But I think a lot of it is that there are things that I've said over the years, and I think over the years it comes from way back, and to some point, to some degree, I don't know where it came from. But if you grew up as a teen in the the late 70s, early 80s, you know exactly what the dialogue was at that particular time. It was that men had these roles and women had these roles. And even though there are certain cultures that function and thrive off of that, um, I think there are other cultures that are finding that there's a pushback now. And I think the pushback is not to say that I'm any better, but it is that, hey, those rules apply to me as far as being capable and having the same abilities as the other person.
Yeah. Well, I just appreciate your self awareness and your self insight, because I think it takes a very aware person to realize that there's a whole lot of people, and I count myself among them until very recently, who are really believing that they can somehow overpower unconscious bias because being biased would be against what they value, or that's just not who they want to be or how they want to show up. And I really believe that. I felt like as an HR professional, I was able, unlike other people, to power through my unconscious bias because it's my job.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized is I can't. And um, that Forbes blog that I told you about, the headline is an international HR leader publicly and bravely admits her bias against women leaders.
Mm-hmm.
It's clickbait for sure, but
Right.
what's interesting about this is I don't think another HR person has admitted that they're just like everyone else and that we all have bias.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what made it a bit shocking and intriguing. And that was the intention, right? Is
Right.
cut through the noise. And if it can happen to somebody whose job it is to be unbiased, then it can happen to any of us. And then that self-awareness that you described has a place to come in.
Right. I'm going to refer to the Adam Grant article in the show notes if people want to see it. But I'm also going to refer to the J.T. O'Donnell, both who have written not only once but several times about your TED Talk, and how critical it is that that test could be easily applied to wherever we are, to a small group as well as a large corporation like yours, where there's tens and thousands of employees, and that there are decisions being made every day. But are they being made are the rules being applied the same way to both men and women? I think
Yeah.
it's a great dialogue to have, and it's time. I think the
Yeah.
timing is right now.
Well, and
Go
if
ahead.
I could, it's important also to note this isn't just about men and women. I think it's easy for me to point out men and women in my own bias as a woman leader in the scenario, but flip it to test it as an idea to combat bias. It works really for every type of bias, and it's struck me the other day. Someone tagged "flip it to test it" on Twitter in sharing an article about the fact that if someone has a foreign sounding name,
Yes.
they're much less likely to be invited for an interview, on a resume. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's a great flip it to test it. Look at the resume and imagine all of them are John Smith. If that's what it takes for you to look at them, flip it and then decide if you want to look at the candidate, because, just something as minor as somebody's name not looking as, I don't know, American or whatever can inhibit our ability as leaders to bring the most qualified, the best person in for the role.
Yeah, I think that makes me think of a past guest that I had. Her name is Stephanie Lampkin. She came up
Oh, I
with,
love Stephanie.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
her her app was to take the gender out, take the race out, take all these personal identifying traits out of the process, at least at the beginning, for employers to make a decision, and you're just looking at the merit. You're not looking at any other factors, even where they live and location. So I think that's a very powerful application of that. If there was more of that throughout hiring processes throughout the world, and there are companies that are working on it, that it can actually be again. That's just part of the larger dialogue that we should be having. Is how can we make it so that everybody it has a fair shot at having a job, at having an opportunity, and being able to say something significant.
Yeah, and to your earlier point, because I think a lot of people kind of lead with because it's the right thing to do. And as much as I hate to say it, I haven't found that the masses are usually motivated by doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
But really, as you look at the way the world is changing and becoming far more competitive and far more global and far more complex and at a rate of speed unlike what we've ever seen before, no company, no individual has the ability to say, I'm going to reject large portions of the talent pool in the world. It'd be insane.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the question is, what are we going to do to overcome our unconscious bias that puts us in the direction of doing that? Because it won't be how we win in this disruptive kind of future market.
Right. Yes, and that is your tech talk is slowly making the world realize how this dialogue could be very very friendly and easier. Meaning that you have bias, that's difficult. That's no easy task. But I think once you get past that, the dialogue could really be a lot more freeing and a lot more encouraging for others, especially if you're not taking it personally.
Yeah, exactly.
But we have to get past those barriers, of course. Kristen, thank you so much for joining me here on my little podcast. Should people want to get a hold of you, I believe your Twitter handle is at @kpressner. Is that right?
It is. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kristen. I will point towards the YouTube video in the show notes, as well as link to some of the other things that we talked about. And I thank you for spending time with me today.
Oh, Mark, thank you very much for the opportunity. And really, thanks for the great work that you do on the Voice of Job Seekers podcast. It's such an important gift to the world, and it was an honor to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And it's an honor to have you. For the rest of you, thank you very much. We have one more show to go for this summer. Next week will be Mac Pritchard of Mac's List. He'll be a guest on the show, and we'll be talking about his book, Find a Dream Job. In the meantime, thank you very much. Don't forget, my hiatus starts after the show next week, but I will still have articles on the blog, so feel free to go to the blog, thevoiceofjobseekers.com. You can also send me an email if you have questions or you'd like to comment on the show at mark@thevoiceofjobseekers.com. I'll also take calls, 708-365-9822. You can also text me at that number. In the meantime, see you next week. Have a great week.